some people standing in the back. There's seats up front, like I said. If you're standing, I'm more likely to ask a question. If you're in the back, I'm more likely to ask you a question. All right. So I think most of the people have it. Okay. For those of you just walking in, this is a link up top where you can send a survey to me as I'm actually presenting to let me know how lost you are. That's all you're getting out of it. If you didn't show up earlier, you're just like me. Terrible. Terrible. That should stay at the bottom. We'll see if that goes. If somebody next to you asks what that is, just let them know, show them your phone. We'll go from there. Perfect. Thank you for being with me. Okay. All the ubiquitous things. Ready with the recording in the back? Good. All right. Go. This is recorded for posterity, so if anybody has any questions, there you go. It shall be recorded. Let me put my microphone on. I tend to talk loud, so if this gets annoying for somebody in the back, and it's not just me, it's the volume that's annoying, just do let me know, and I'll. It's pretty loud in the back, right? Is it good? It's just good? Okay. Okay. Then I shall go continue forward like everything is fine. There's no problems. I actually may be prepared for this, maybe not. We'll all find out in a moment. Okay. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here for NI Alliance Day. Just a quick show of hands. Who are the Alliance members in the audience? Fantastic. Oh, that's way better than the 0 that was in the last one that I was in. NI Sales, gotta love them. So we are here. We are going to learn about the rebirth of the LabVIEW state machine. Now, this is a presentation that was given, I think, back in 2013. It is a just pretty much a redo of it. So if you have seen this before, if you have watched the presentation, you definitely understood it, then you're just going to hear it again. The reason that I'm actually giving it again as a kind of a carbon copy almost is because there's been a new version of this that is in the works to be released soon that has had some great improvements. Aaron Ryan, sitting up here, raise your hand, Aaron. He was the one who worked along, did most of the work and took a lot of feedback from me. But this is going to get you ready, hopefully, for the next presentation so you can actually appreciate the thing that he's saying and not just put a bunch of 5s into his survey. And that being said, welcome to Rebirth of the LabVIEW State Machine. Not what I want to do. There we go. Also known as why your queue-driven message handler is doomed. I am Norman Kirchner. I am a principal RF systems engineer at National Instruments. My day job is supposed to be trying to help National Instruments sell RF hardware, but I cut my teeth and I'm through and through a LabVIEW nut job, as people refer to me as. So we'll start off. How would somebody identify this bird? Like, what process would you go through? Now, a friend of mine posed this to me many years ago, and it was kind of an interesting back and forth conversation, but at the root of it, it was like, well, you'd say, like, okay, well, you know, does it clearly have wings? Where's the laser? Get laser, man. All right, so it's like, okay, it's got a really long beak, it's got webbed feet. Well, you can kind of tell by the looks of it, it's a kiwi. Right? No big shock here in terms of what it is. It's easy to identify, even though we don't know, is it real? Is it a picture of one? Is it a stuffed kiwi? We don't know the details about it, but we can tell just by looking at it. That being said, what is this? State machine. All right, fantastic. I didn't need to shake anybody down or offer presents. You lose. Sorry, man. But in any case, yes, this is a state machine. We don't know much about it, but we do know from the looks of it, it has 4 different states. This is the indication of the start. This is actually a state diagram. There could be some purists in the room. We'll get into some, well, we're going to skirt around some of the purist ideas, so sorry if you get twitchy. But, and then there's transitions that go between those states. That being said, what is this? Cute, exactly. We can tell, but the one thing that it is not a state machine. All too often, and it kind of seems to be declining a little bit, too often people say, oh, this is my state machine, or this is my producer-consumer, and these are my states down here in the bottom. It's not. It's just not. please, if you do currently refer to these things as states of your program in terms of the case structure down there, just stop and hold on for dear life. You're going to learn what to call them soon. All right. Any questions? See. All right. Feel free. I've got a live view of the survey here. Once there's 25, I'll stop either way. So as you do indeed find yourself lost or along the way, please enter in your responses there. That being said, so some of you might be in the room in the back who have sent their children to college in the future based off of your Q-driven message handler, and would be saying, what is wrong with what I've been doing? How dare you say that anything that I've been doing is wrong? I'm the world's fastest LabVIEW programmer. I would say that most of the time, in my experience, you're dealing with that, your Q-driven message handler, you have created a bridge like that. You have gone through the process of making something that, as long as they walk across the bridge just right, you're going to get, I'm sure there's probably thousands of people per month that cross over this bridge, no problem, because they've probably been doing it since they've been 2. Much like you, raising your Q-driven message handler program for a long time, you know what not to do. You know that when all of a sudden there's a slight hang because you clicked a button, don't go clicking around on the rest of the screen, right? You gotta, just don't click. When you just don't. Or you try to use enable and disable structures, or not enable and disable controls and indicators to prevent people from clicking things. What ends up happening is eventually that process fails, and you can see what happens when one of those bridges indeed fails because somebody stepped on the wrong button at the wrong time in your program. There's ways of patching this bridge to making it more sound, but at the end of the day, the design itself is, I would say, bound for failure. That being said, I will try to prove this quickly along the way. See what I got here. All right. So I have a program. I hit start. It's supposed to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not supposed to crash. When I hit stop, the program stops. That is a successful program. So the plain Jane or Jim LabVIEW programmer may have done something like this, where they hit the start button enqueues that state, and then the next one enqueues the state, and it just keeps going, and it's kind of this just sequence of actions that would happen in the system. Very common way of doing this if you start from a producer-consumer style QDMH, or even if you do something within the already built-in templates in LabVIEW, you might still do something like this. But as you can see, what's the problem? If all of a sudden I double tap on the start, yeah, it's not running right. Clearly, imagine it's moving a motor or a stage or turning up temperatures. There's problems in the system at this point in time, right? Okay, so that's not good. So what does the savvy LabVIEW programmer do? Well, the savvy LabVIEW programmer goes like, there we go. Says, okay, great. In that case, when you hit start button 1, I'm just going to enqueue all the other actions all at once. Therefore, you can't click the button in the middle of it. It will just start next. And as we can see through here, I'll go ahead and run it. Move it up away from my head. There's start. Okay, it looks like it's working, right? Oh, wait. Oh, whoa. I didn't do state 1. Hopefully this is not moving. Is this moving too fast for everybody? This is decent pace. All right, fantastic. Still looking at the poll. So that programmer is going to well, what happened there? Well, clearly, I enqueued too many state 1s before doing the rest of them. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and fix that problem. Once again, does this workflow seem familiar to any of you in terms of well, I found that bug, fix it. Found that bug, fix it. Well, let's keep going just for the sake of it. All right, so there's start. I'm going to go ahead and hit that start, and I'm going to hit it at random times and hit it a bunch of times. All right, seems to be working great. All right, so there's a couple of them there. Now I hit stop. Oh, hey there. All right, well, that's no good. So now my flow's perfect every time, but just because I happen to sneeze while clicking it, I'm going through this thing and I can't stop it in the process. Not even between states, but even after it's done doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I can't even stop it. It's still going. All right, there we go. So that's clearly a problem. Let's see. So that savvy LabVIEW programmer went and just tried to enqueue them all up at once at the beginning. Once again, still not the answer to the problem. All right, so then what would be the answer to the problem well, I want to do an exit. Okay, well, you get the idea of the program. So what that savvy LabVIEW programmer is going to do is this fancy thing. If you didn't notice, on the enqueue element, you can enqueue at the opposite end. So what is this going to work now when I hit the stop button? That sounds Seems pretty reasonable. I'll go ahead and do a happy dance on the start. Okay, it's there, and the program stopped. Perfect. It didn't go all the way to 5, which maybe it should have done, but that's okay. At least it stopped, so we're good, right? The program scope never changes. We're not going to get asked to do anything else at this point, right? Everybody should be laughing. Okay. So, we want to save our information before we stop the program. Okay, well, great. So we've got that NQ at opposite end, but I will ask the question, dubiously so, which order do I set that array into? Should it be save and then exit, or exit and then save?
Exit.
Exit then save. All right, fantastic. All right, let's go ahead and let's go. All right, that's the one that's enabled, right? Okay, so indeed, if I go ahead and hit start and stop, perfect. It works, right? All right, let's go ahead and run it again. Let's try doing a couple different things. Let's just hit stop. We'll let it run. Great. Let's go ahead and make sure that we stop and save the data. Wait. Didn't run. Why didn't save data run that time? Exactly. It NQ'd exit first, to which this guy was waiting for the command, sucked it out right away, and exited before it had a chance to run the save. Except when the queue's loaded, you're now pushing it on the other end. So clearly, I hope that it's clear. We've got, okay, starting to lose people here. That's not too bad. 12 responses, mostly people with me, thank you. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that indeed there is a problem with this design. There's ways, like I said, you can kind of patch the bridge a little bit around it, but most of the time we end up in this scenario. And what's at the heart of the problem? Well, I would say that at the heart of the problem, there's this concept of functional Play-Doh that has happened here. So now, anybody here have no idea what Play-Doh is? I've presented this overseas, and a lot of hands went up. So everybody knows what Play-Doh is. Don't need to bring it. Okay. Didn't bring it with me this time. The basic idea is this is what the people at the Play-Doh Corporation would have you believe that children will build with the Play-Doh. And Sue laughed. Fantastic. I didn't even need to prompt it. But as we all know, it's much more likely that this is what said children will be making with the code. Oh, sorry, with the Play-Doh. We'll get there in a moment. Well, I would say that when we are doing the same thing with our code because we are taking the flow of the program and mushing it together with the actions and the doing of the program in the system. And so what I say is that there's a problem with this is the problem. We have inside of our queue-driven message handler an implicit state machine. When I say state machine, I say I am in this state of the program, I'm going to go to here, I'm going to do these things, just the general flow. If you say, when I hit the initialize button, I'm going to call an action that initializes of this, initializes of this, initializes of this. Each is different actions. Those aren't different states of the program. You're in the initializing state. Can you kind of hear the difference in the nomenclature between those two? And so, indeed, what we need to do is exercise and make that state machine an explicit element within our programs. Now, what has ended up happening over time is that there's been a variety of incarnations of the queue-driven message handler. Some people still start from blank block diagram. Some people start from the producer-consumer template. Some people start from Darren Nattinger's queue-driven message handler project example template, called, or as was showcased this morning, Fabiola's Delacour queued message handler. Each one of those has varying degrees of features and skills and sets. Even actor framework, as a design, still operates off of this. I have an actor, it has a queue of instructions, and it's going to operate on them. But there's nothing explicit in any one of those designs that lays out, I am in this state of the program, and based on what somebody has asked me to do, I'm going to behave a certain way. So, let's see if I can... Yeah, we're going to go ahead and melt your brain first. Let's see. We have 19 people. Most people still on board with it. Fantastic. So what do we need to do in order to kind of break this problem? First, I need to melt your brains, as by horrific graphic that we have there. Don't worry, that is just a hat, apparently, that you can purchase. Some people freaked out about that. We were very scared. But indeed, look at one of the programs that you have. Think of it in your mind, if you can, and start to think of it what are the modes of the program? The way that you can identify a mode of the program usually is by your usage. There we go. Your usage of enable and disable enable and disable properties of controls and indicators. Right? I hit a button. I want to disable a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. I want to clear a graph. I want to change a tab to a very specific thing. Why are you doing that? Well, it's probably because your program has moved from one mode to a different mode of the given program. That's very much the case. And so if we start to think about that idea of the states of the program, or try to, if you haven't been thinking in terms of states of your program, and you've been calling those case structures states down below, modes is a good word. And then you start to say, okay, what are the other things that are happening in the system? Well, a button push, a variable crossing a threshold, those become triggers of the program. And so if I was in a monitoring mode waiting for something to happen, I might look at a variable and make a choice based off of whether it has crossed an individual threshold and do something. Now, if I am in the shutdown case, is it likely that I need to pay attention to that specific trigger? No. In a traditional queue-driven message handler, if there is a piece of code that, well, we'll get into that in a minute. In any case, and then you would say actions happen on the transitions in between the states. So let's go ahead and get into an example of that with this same chunk of code that we had before. Oh, what did I say last time? Oh. I didn't save it. Okay, so here. We got this. We apologize. Oh, that's fine. Same. So ignoring that last one. Sorry, one enumeration is going to two different examples. So hence the reason for the breakage. But what about if we treated our program to be a little bit like this? We have our startup, where the program goes to, and it doesn't need to go there's no choices that need to be made. I'll do the startup, and then I will immediately go to the idle. And I will sit in the idle until what happens? Until the trigger happens, until somebody actually pushes a button on the system. Now, normally that would just enqueue an action in the queue-driven message handler, right? But that doesn't have any stateful awareness to that at all. You're just going to enqueue an action irrespective of whether or not you should enqueue the action. So the idea is you have to have some intelligence to figure out what is going on. All right, so we still have 19 people still holding on apparently. I should probably do one. Should I go faster? But in general, if I were to look at this program, I still have the same list of actions that exist here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, save, exit. But now I have a very specific place in this program that says, while I am processing, sorry, I'm going to do this here. There we go. What has happened? And so if I look at the flow of the program, I still have my traditional queue-driven message handler here. That's why I like this design so much, is because when I talk to people about it, I'm not trying to break your minds that bad when it comes down to, I need you to rip down everything and start developing an active framework, which is a very, very paradigm-shifting concept. This is still a queue-driven message handler at the heart of it, but it has this other section that happens over here. And this section over here operates by thinking of, what state am I currently in? Is that clear? Can you see that in the back, Ben? All right. So there's multiple states that end up existing there, and then what triggers have happened in the system. So I've been talking about triggers and actions, and you may have noticed that there's two queues that exist in my system here. That is one of the biggest changes of this design. That there is still your traditional action queue that exists. You can still queue up a list of actions in the system. But then there exists now a secondary queue that is solely supposed to be for triggers. Now, the really interesting difference between this and what used to exist is that this queue used to be available to who? This queue, you could in-queue more actions there. You could in-queue more actions at the top of the I've got a laser pointer. I should be using my fancy laser pointer. I'm supposed to randomly gesticulate. There we go. All right, so you could in-queue actions here, here, here. You could do it anywhere, right? There was no real rhyme or reason, unless somebody really told you, be very careful about where you in-queue actions and only do it in this manner. But now, if you'll note, this queue no longer makes its way inside of that. If you think about this section over to the right over here, the only thing in your program that should be allowed to in-queue actions in the system is the brain. That's why I refer to this as the brain of the programs. This is the brawn, this is the brains. If you can make that separation, life can get really easy. Because you can start developing programs really without actually having all the guts inside of it. You know what you want the program to do. You know how you want it to flow. Well, program that flow up, put the buttons on the front panel, but you don't have to have the drivers and everything else installed. And you can test that flow as well to make sure that it indeed is working. So in this program, if I were to let it run slow, I think I should be able to do this. If you can, let's see. So let's actually together walk through how this program is going to flow without caring about any of the actions. So what should probably be the first thing, what's the first state I'm going to go through here? There, right? Startup, exactly. So let's go. Okay, so when my program indeed does start up, it's going to say, it's going to do a quick query for have any triggers happen. Now, granted, the very first thing that happens in your program, it probably shouldn't be receiving any triggers, but it could, right? Sometimes when you run your program, you start clicking buttons, LabVIEW's not responding maybe, because that happened too. And so all of a sudden it registers 28 button pushes by the time that it gets past loading some driver in the background. Okay, well, and that's in a normal scenario. I'm going to do no actions. I'm not operating on this queue, and now I'm going to transition to the idle state. Pretty straightforward. Maybe you would want to do something in terms of, I'm going to change my front panel look or feel. But I wouldn't do that action here. I would simply in-queue it into the system. All right, so once I go to the idle state, let's see what we got there. Then what happens? Well, if I have no trigger that happens in the system, guess what it does? Stays in the idle state. All right, so let's say what happens when I give a specific trigger to the system. All right, well, close application. Okay, well, guess what we're doing? When I get to close application, I save, like I wasn't able to before, and then I do shutdown. Then I go to the shutdown state, and things end from there. Similarly so, if I go to start sequence, I will actually, interestingly enough, re-in-queue that same trigger into the system, and then go to the next state. I'm going to go to the processing state and have the processing state now handle that trigger. The idle part of the brain, you can almost think of every individual state in your program as a separate brain, dedicated to knowing only what it's supposed to do in that mode. And there's some presumptions that in order to be in this mode, some things will have needed to have happened. And in order to leave this to go to that state, I need to do certain things. But it's not going to actually perform those things in that section over there. So, okay, so it goes to processing, and then I re-in-queue start sequence. All right, let's go to processing. And then I know that I'm going to get the start sequence. Ah, here we go. Now when I'm in the processing state, and it receives the start sequence, then it will in-queue all those actions at once. Now remember a couple of those examples. One of the things that happen is actions could come in between other actions and mess up my flow, right? But guess what? Who else can in-queue actions now? As long as you don't fork that wire and go crazy on the design, nobody. You are guaranteed by this design that you're not going to have other actions going in between and wrecking that flow of your program. All those times when you're inside of a case structure, or one of the actions, or what you used to call states, of your program, and you used to have like a, oh, check this variable, check that variable, make sure this thing's initialized. All you're doing is making sure that you've transitioned out of a previous state. Well, now you don't have to do that checking inside of an action to figure out whether or not you should do the action. By definition of the fact that the brain has sent you there, if the brain isn't screwed up, which indeed can happen, we're only human and this is just our programs, then you should never end up in an action that is incompatible with that mode. But the other beautiful part of it is, if you do, you know where to go. If your flow is screwed up, guess where you go? If your actions are screwed up, guess where you go? Hey, it actually worked. There you go. So, hopefully this is kind of giving you this feel where there's potentially a problem previously in that by being able to separate these two different paradigms of stateful flow and control of the program versus the actual the muscles of it per se, you're going to get some advantage. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and forcefully pause myself, and I'm going to bring up that web page. Let's see what we've got. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second. Let's see. We have currently 19 responses live, so we still have some more buckets. I'm seeing most people are still with me here, which is fantastic and kind of surprising. There you go. There you go. All right. Okay. Well, fantastic. Then I shall charge forcefully ahead with this. And let's see. About what? What does this go to? 20 after, right? Okay. Perfect. Okay. So, if you can, so let's see. But one thing to stress about this, one of the very also mind-melting things is you have to stop thinking about brains as the things actually doing the work. You would say that as I do one of these, let's see if I've got it still up here. As I would do a transition from that state to that state, that is when my actions are happening. The actions are happening as I even if it's me. Even if it is my, if I'm transitioning back to myself, this is when I do the actions. So I'm in the brain, I've received a trigger, or I've received no trigger, and then I say, what do? I enqueue actions, and then those actions happen along here. If I could almost, I would love to do a picture control that would do highlight execution that would actually show a little list of actions that would go boop, 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 along there. I probably should have done it for the presentation to better illustrate that the individual things now in that the brain or the guts of the program are now happening along there. So that being said, all at once in unison, 4-part harmony, actions only happen on transitions. Thank you. Okay, it's terrible. I'll get new people next time. Just kidding. Let's see what we got here. So indeed, to bring up a more realistic example of this, I have a program that I made that will allow me to very easily look through block diagrams of things that are currently selected in the project. And then I can very quickly scroll through them. Keep in mind, this is actually a live diagram. Kind of slick little tool. It's actually the example program. If you don't, it'll be Prime. So if you like this and would like to use it yourself, it's available. That being said, what do I have it actually using in the background? Guess what? It has the example program for TLB Prime. I've illustrated this program. Actually, let's use that zoom instead. By giving a flat sequence structure, or actually stacked here, that kind of illustrates, hey, what happens when I'm in the viewing state? Those are the two triggers that I respond to: close application and unload application. If indeed this is the trigger, I will re-enqueue this trigger. If it's unload collection, I'll enqueue these actions. So this doesn't happen automatically. I had to manually put this together. But there's one thing that I'd like to note about this technique. Anytime I've tried to see anybody's implementation of describing how their program is supposed to flow, it usually ends up needing a plotter and about 3 rainforest trees. Because it's this massive flow diagram of yes, no's, this happened, that happened, and it's a stinking mess for something that could actually describe what's supposed to happen in the program through just some basics. This is the mode of the program. These are the things that are supposed to happen along the way. One of the big differences about this paradigm shift is now you can actually document how your program is supposed to work. Why does that matter? You know how to walk across your own bridge, right? Well, guess what? When you leave the company, or the next person comes on the program, or you try to teach somebody LabVIEW and say, hey, use this thing, it's a few different message handler, you should be able to figure it out, and they completely wreck the flow. How often does that happen? It happens easily. I mean, it's not just a LabVIEW thing, it's an anybody thing. But now, with this design, with this, I guess this baseline template, actually I guess it's more of a reference design, I would say that documenting what's supposed to happen, what are the assumptions, like, before I go into the viewing state, I don't have it on here, but I should have a list of presumptions that have to be true before you're allowed. So if somebody else wants to put a new state into the program, they should do whatever is necessary to make my assertions true before going into me. And if that's the case, then they don't have to worry about what happens in the rest of the program. They've transitioned over to me, my presumptions are true, me as this other brain that already existed, just came from somebody else's, the program should still flow naturally. And if the flow gets wrecked, guess where you're going to start looking? Not in all of their actions. Right? They put who knows what they put in every last one of their actions, but if it's the flow, you go to the state, you go to the brain, and you start fixing things from there. Alright, so it's been 30 minutes, let's see. Alright, people are still not completely lost. I will go ahead and clear the survey since most people are logged in. Yes, you must be number 2. That's good. Go ahead.
Yeah, so how do you interrupt then? Yeah, if you say the actions happen on that, you know, if you then keep the 5 states and then you want to like actually, you know, exit like mid-run.
I'm glad you asked. That's the next demo. All right. So indeed. So I will answer that in 2 parts. First, I will go the who are you to question me action. No. Let's see, that's not the one. Oh, quick aside, for anybody who didn't know, Control-Shift-W in LabVIEW is a shortcut that brings up this, there we go, brings up this amazing window that shows you all windows either by the file name, the title of the window, or the path that you can sort independently to either open independently, or you can actually close the windows in mass, which is really, really nice. Especially if you got like a driver open and it's like all in one directory, you just sort by driver. Anyways, that's an aside. Yes. I learned one thing from that damn presentation. What was that? There we go. Back to where we wanted to be. So the question at hand, what about when you want to stop immediately, early terminate as I call it? Let's go ahead and actually, we'll show this guy. Because one of the things that I didn't note in this example is that now that you have multiple things set up in the program, you can actually probe what mode your programs are, which triggers have been queued up, and which actions have been queued up, so that if you pause your program at any one point in time, it gives you a really good idea of about where you're about to go. Now, if all of your actions were dispersed amongst the program, or in-queued from other actions, it would be really, really hard to tell. But in this case, go back to the front panel. Actually, I should be moving up there and let's get out of the way. You can tell I'm currently on action 3, I'm in the processing state, and indeed action 4 and 5 have happened. So let's go ahead and actually hit start again. Once again, kind of almost a realistic scenario where your program's hung for a second, right? And somebody clicks a button. Now you'll see, as I've paused it there, there's an extra thing in the trigger queue. Start sequence. But I'm on action 4, I still need to do action 5, and I don't want to do anything until I'm done with that list of actions. Until that transition's complete, I don't go back to a brain to figure out what I'm supposed to do. And so what's going to happen is it'll do 4, 5, and then it will process that trigger again from the processing state. Right? So I transitioned. Let's see if I can do this here. So I was doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then there was this other trigger that came in somewhere along that point. Somewhere at that point. Somewhere in between. But the brain's like, okay, I got it. I'm going to keep doing what I was supposed to do. Now the question is, how do I break that cycle? So I'll answer, as I mentioned, I'll answer in 2 different ways. One, do you really, 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 really need to instantaneously, at that instant, stop? And sure, if people's lives are on the line, then you probably, there's this, oh, I got to stop it, right? But really, there's probably some delay between things. So most of the time, from a desktop application or a user interface, an e-stop grade where lives and money and things are on the line, you probably don't want linked to a stop button on your front panel. And even if you do, normally the way that I like to think about it is that your transition should execute relatively quick. Much like the car wash example for the CLD exam or the ATM, something that you need a wait. Do you put a hard-coded wait on your block diagram? No, you create a timer and you pull that timer so that your program can respond within a certain period of time. So goes it with individual transitions. But that's not always the case either. Sometimes for the sake of simplicity, you will have a transition take a longer period of time. Say you're initializing an FPGA reference, right? Or trying to do something else that just inherently will take a longer period of time. And you want it to terminate right away or before it goes to the next action, right? Because if you're in something that's a blocking call, you might be hosed anyway. So there's two different ways that I like to say to do that. You can, at the end of the day, this is a LabVIEW program, and you could technically take this queue and force something in at the opposite end for the sake of sanity. Another thing that I will sometimes do, well, actually, truth be told, I don't have that need. Like I said, I try to make things so that it can respond relatively well, is that I will break up a given state, possibly into multiple states. If you know that this thing's going to hang, and you want to come back in, I may inject a secondary state in there for the sake of breaking out of it. That's a way of holding the paradigm and still enabling that ability to break out of something that you know you have to break out of very, very quickly. So it's not necessarily, so what do you think about that? I don't know, I feel like I'm fragile.
No, I mean, I think it's from a readability perspective, I think it's a little bit, you know, like you're kind of, it's a workaround. It seems like a workaround.
You have to process it more. That's okay. But no, I agree. I don't like this. That's why, luckily, in most of the desktop applications, I'm doing test and measurement all the time. I'm not a controls guy. Working on PXI, I'm getting data, I'm trying to create a UI for doing a demo or a big system. Most of the time I don't have to worry about it instantly exiting kind of thing. Who has needed Excel to exit at the instant you hit that X? So I'm not saying I'm making Excel, but I'm kind of drawing a little bit of a delineation between the two of them somewhat. So there, I have no grand answer for that.
But it's not even an answer, right? Like you include the 5 states, you put it even exit.
The 5 actions?
Right, like you break between the 5 actions. It's not, that's not instantaneous, right?
So the way that let me see if I can illustrate that appropriately. One of the parts of the template that ends up happening, I've never actually referenced this case structure on the outside here. I've never talked about that. That is pretty much, that Boolean going in there is kicking the brain awake. And really, that should only happen when I have no action coming into the system. That's the idea behind it. Excuse me. So if I had an action where I really wanted to kickstart the brain, so I kind of check things, I could, within an action, send that to true, and then I would have to make a more robust brain to deal with handling that specific short-circuiting exit at that one point in time. So that would be a way of kind of working through that. It's not one that I would recommend because it's breaking paradigm. You've got to try to figure out more things. But it would be potentially still a workaround. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Okay, we're starting to lose people. Yes?
Kind of with this question, if it's something that has to stop, in my mind it would be more of a hardware action. I mean, somebody has hit an e-stop, or maybe I have a button on my front panel that's an e-stop or stop, whatever my safety or human safety action is. And so in your usage of this, is this mostly for controlling more of the user interface and then piping down to maybe a sub-loop to control actions on the hardware level?
Very astute observation, and I would say yes. The question everybody probably heard to a certain degree, but I'll repeat it for the posterity. The basic idea is, if it was something that was critical, wouldn't you shelve it off to a sub-process and let that sub-process be able to receive that command a little bit faster and facilitate some mechanism to send that command instantly instead of having to go through here? And I would say yes. Truth be told, I would probably have another one of these TLB prime templates running the other one that is sitting there just going, I'm in this state, waiting maybe for somebody to send a trigger. And my mode of operation indeed is I'm not doing anything, I am the one trying to monitor this. So I would actually create not only top-level applications with this, but I would do even a system of sub-actions, sub-engines, also using this individual design. Good question, though. Anybody else? Yes?
All right, this is a simple question. So what it sounds like is that the way it's designed is such that it cannot change its state, until the actions for that state position are completed. That's kind of what it sounds like?
Yes, that's 100% on.
Okay, and that's the reason why things like that, it doesn't fit within the architecture to hit the stop button and actually do change states because it has to finish the state that it's currently.
Correct. So just to reiterate, he was just kind of clarifying his understanding that indeed the reason that we can't handle the button push or the trigger is because we are still processing the actions, and the brain does not get kick-started alive until all actions on a transition are complete. Yes?
So Michael in development requires you to use the P model controller, which is very popular. This looks just like that.
It does. Actually, interestingly enough, so who here is familiar with at least the acronym MVC or model view controller? So we've got smattering of hands, okay, so it's about half. And indeed, this, I only stumbled on the reality of that after making this. As I'm designing it, I was like, this thing needs a brain, it needs a brain. I'm starting to put it together. And then I started to learn more about MVC. And truth be told, yeah, it's actually a single diagram. But you know what? But I say that it's close to an MVC to some people who know what MVC is, and I get chastised out the wazoo. No, it's not. You've got to have a this and a that and a this and a that. So it's not an MVC, but it harkens to it, if you will. It allows you to have some of the benefits of an MVC-style program while still retaining your traditional queue-driven message handler experience. Still having it on the one block diagram, which really was at the heart of what I was trying to accomplish by making the design as it is. So, but yes, very appropriate observation. So everybody else that knows MVC was like, wait a minute, this sounds really familiar. A couple of minutes though. That's all right. Any other questions? Good questions so far. Okay, so TLB, top level baseline, is not something that I have illustrated or talked to or heck even really shown in this presentation very much. It has some design choices that are a little different than your traditional queue-driven message handler. It does some dynamic event registration. There's enough little differences that it is almost its own presentation. If you would like, and this does not look familiar to you because this is kind of what, using the colors, the top level baseline as a whole, that's top level baseline, that's top level baseline prime. Both of them are available on lavag.org. So you should be able to do, there you go, TLB, top level baseline prime. They are both available. If you want to understand why it looks like it does, all the things that are not associated with the state machine, you can go on Lava and learn about some of those design choices. Why did I use colors? Why did I use event registration? This, that, and the other associated with that. And then all the state machine stuff, including this presentation, are available at that specific link. So hopefully those of you who are wondering, hey, how can I get started on this? Then you know. Okay. And let's go ahead and open up a more realistic example. Okay, so this is an example of the program that we had previously. And so what I really like about this as well is if I'm trying to walk, as I did with the original example, talk somebody through how my program flows, It's a natural conversation. Just the sheer fact that I can have a natural conversation and walk through my code at the same time validates that this is a good choice. So as I have it here, there we go. So I have my states, startup, idle, viewing, and shut down. And indeed, if I'm an idle, I can receive certain triggers. Are these all of my triggers? Take a wild guess, anybody? No, exactly. Because if I'm in a state that doesn't really care about a trigger, let it fall on the floor. Doesn't matter to me. Once again, that is something that you cannot do in a traditional queue-driven message handler. You in-queue an element, the dang thing gets in queue. Now, some people have other filtering methods. Oh, you in-queue, but you have to drop it. You filter on the in-queue. Well, I'm filtering on the dequeue of the entire system. But indeed, if I am sitting in idle and somebody says load selection, which means I need to go to the project, here are the actions associated with that. Get active project, collect and filter, update this, load item, update display. And then on the output portion here, I simply have, this is the state that the transition goes to. So this would be the declaration. I am in a state. This is the trigger I've received. This is the transition with the actions along it. And then this is where that transition ends up at. Now, if you look, I think I'm in the idle scenario. So let's see what happens when I am in the already viewing scenario. All right, nothing happens. Yeah, you can see there's quite a few actual triggers in the system. Most of them were dropped on the floor. If I'm idle, I don't have to worry about when somebody says change VI. So I don't have any VIs loaded. Let it go. Or save VI for that matter. So indeed, if I am viewing and then somebody says load selection, well, interestingly enough, I'm actually not. I know that me as the viewing state, I don't know how to necessarily load things. Nobody has given me, the viewing brain, the knowledge of how to unload and load things. Well, to a certain degree, unload. But what I'll do is I will go, right, viewing, load, unload, load. I do stay in viewing. Okay, that's a bad example. Sorry, guys. In this case, I do. What I was trying to do is illustrate the scenario of, let's see. I know that if somebody, that's what it ends up being. So I'm already in, so I got to walk you through how we ended up here. I'm already viewing something, and somebody says they've changed whatever they have selected in the project, and they hit the same button again to load all those VIs up into memory. So I already have a transition that works in terms of unloading and loading into the given state. So instead of me doing all of those actions here, I will just say, when somebody says load selection, just unload and load. Because guess what happens when I unload my collection? Guess what state I go to? Idle, exactly. And then idle knows how to load selection. So now if I go here, viewing, to unload collection, indeed, I will do the steps or actions necessary to transition to the idle state. Idle state needs that everything's closed out. You know, what are those assertions? Tree's empty, references are closed, and I forget what unload active is. Oh, it's just the kicking things out of memory. And then it goes to the idle state, to which now there's a queue in the background with another trigger for what? Load selection. So now I will go to load selection and, idle and load selection. Once again, all the actions that we needed to do that same thing. All of this in a traditional queue-driven message handler would very likely be dispersed amongst all the actions in there. Hopefully you can kind of feel that that's dangerous. That's a problem in terms of the way that programs would normally flow. Okay, so I'm at the 50-minute mark, if I'm not mistaken. I will, let's see. The next presentation that happens after this, indeed, is going to be the continuation. Oh, actually, I'll just kind of illustrate and air my dirty laundry. Somewhere right now. There you go. Some of the things that indeed are missing from it, actually it's not even listed on here. The interrupting actions is a known kind of frailty on this that is not talked about in the next one. Updating controls and indicators, you can see on the presentation online. And if you do a really, really crazy wild diagram, the state machine can still be pretty chaotic. If you do different layers, you can kind of describe just one state at a time and what it means to go into and out of. But the one biggest part of this that's missing is error handling. Currently, any queue-driven message handler that I've ever seen does not necessarily handle errors well. Because normally what you end up having is you just have an action that's called error. And you try to do something with that system when you encounter that error. But what caused that error? What led to that error? What state were you in that error? What do you do once you have that error? All of these things rarely get handled. It's usually a, guess what? Simple error handler. Stop or continue, right? That's terrible. It's terrible. And finally, Aaron, like I said, the next presentation is the continuation of this, that he's going to go into those, that's not even advanced features. It's just stuff that I never put in the first place because I just didn't know. I didn't think how to do it. It's taken me 4 years to finally come to the point. Actually, is Mark Gednack in the room? Mark is not. Okay. So some of the users of this we brainstormed over time. I was just trying to give credit where credit is due in terms of where some of these problems exist. So that being said, you had a question in front. Okay. Anybody else with questions? Like I said, go out, come back in, stick around for the next one. Get anything? All right. In the back.
So I noticed that you used string constants for one queue and string constant for one queue and strict type definings for the other. Is there a particular design decision behind that?
There is. Everything, so in short, every wire bend, every color, everything has actually a design choice. We talked to a while ago. That being said, I started off using the AMC, asynchronous message communication, as my queue pipe for the system. It was just an API that did what I wanted it to. I just did reuse on it. It is string-based API. I liked the ability to do that because then I didn't need to create a new API for every different enumerated. Because if you had a strict type def enumeration, you made a sub-VI, now you can't reuse that same sub-VI beyond all the different frameworks. So I would have to create a new API for in-queuing and dequeuing for every one. That being said, so why didn't I use that again didn't I use strings again for my triggers? It looks really confusing. At the end of the day, I thought, I started off with an enumeration because inherently an enumeration is a little bit easier, and I didn't think I was going to make an API for in-queuing and dequeuing triggers. So it didn't make a difference, that same old problem. And also it made it really nice because on the block diagram, if you can tell, and I might be able to prototype this real quick, it makes it a little bit more clear which queue you're dealing with. If I were to take this guy, really? It gets a little bit more hard. So Aaron, like I said, he's taken this template and he's beaten it up a little bit. He wanted to turn them both into strings, or potentially both into enumerations. And every time I looked at it, I just got a little twitchy. So it just made it easier. And there's one more choice, is that there's only one case structure that actually has all of your actions in it. So there's one place where you can have a typo in all of your actions. However, every different state possibly is going to have the full list of triggers, which is probably a bad example. So I would have to type each one of those for every state in the program along the way. So truth be told, I'm going to have more case structures that have triggers than I will case structures that have actions. So if I had to pick one, I feel like I picked it right because I'll have less typing in that scenario and less chance for error. But should you like, so this template has been the design idea. Whether or not, you know what, if y'all don't download this and use it personally and take it to heart like I have, that's fine with me. There have been very skilled engineers who have taken this concept and rolled it in their own vision. That's what I care about the most. Exercise that evil implicit state machine and make it a friendly brother along the way. So if you want to change that, if you like that, then by all means you can make them both enumeration based or both string based. It's up to you. I won't pray. Yes?
This question kind of is similar to the idea by error handling, but I think it's kind of separate. How would this kind of handle feedback? So a lot of key message counters generally say do actions 1 through 5, and there isn't any explicit check and see if actions 1, 2, 3, 5 are actually successful.
So in terms of the certain degree of success of a given action, I would say that if an action went from tip to tail and didn't toss an error, then there is a basic assumption that it worked. If there is a pass or fail criteria that happened inside of it, you should be loading it up into that shift register, the big cluster up top, to hold that information. And what ends up happening is, if you'll notice, the reason nobody asked, why didn't you make this an asynchronous VI or something else that exists outside the program? I'll give you one reason. Because of that wire right there. That wire right there. Because the brain needs to know about the variables of the program. And that cluster holds all information about the program itself. So if you did have a pass or fail criteria that didn't throw an error, the brain should catch it, look at that, and make smart decisions based off of whatever is inside of that shift register itself. Or inside of that large cluster wire that we have there.
Actually showed an example of that when I
There
do one.
we go. All right. And so nobody feels awkward, no extra jumping hands. All right. Thank you all very much. I thank you all for chiming in on the poll EV stuff. And stick around for the next one. But other than that, y'all have a great NIWeek.